The dust swirled around Eliza Carter's worn boots as she stood outside Holbrook's general store, her fingers trembling as they clutched the small gold band. The Kansas sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden boardwalk, and she could feel the eyes of passers-by boring into her back. A widow at 24, with nothing left but the clothes on her back and this single piece of gold that once promised forever. "Please, Mr. Holbrook," she said quietly, pushing the ring across the counter. The storekeeper, a portly man with graying whiskers, barely glanced at it before shaking his head. "Ma'am, I told you already. Gold don't fill bellies around here. What folks need is strong backs for harvest, not jewelry." He pushed the ring back toward her with a stubby finger. "You'd best try your luck elsewhere." Eliza's stomach clenched with hunger. She hadn't eaten properly in 3 days. Not since she'd spent her last penny on a stale biscuit in the previous town. Pride had kept her from begging, but pride was becoming a luxury she could no longer afford. "Just a loaf of bread," she whispered. "Or some cornmeal, anything." The bell above the door chimed as another customer entered. Eliza didn't turn around, too focused on willing the storekeeper to show mercy. Her late husband Thomas had bought this ring in St. Louis, saved for months to afford it. Now it seemed worthless as a pebble on the prairie. "Problem here, Holbrook?" A deep voice spoke from behind her. "No problem, Mr. Harper. Just explaining to this lady that we don't trade in gold." Eliza finally turned. The man who'd entered was tall and lean, with sun-weathered features that spoke of long days under the open sky. His clothes were practical but well-maintained. Canvas pants, a blue work shirt, leather vest. Not a townsman, she realized, but not quite a drifter either. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, the color of prairie grass, took in her travel-stained dress and hollow cheeks with a quick, assessing glance. "I was just leaving," Eliza said, reaching for the ring. Her hand shook with the effort of maintaining composure. "That's a wedding band," the man observed quietly. She nodded, unable to trust her voice. "Holbrook, give the lady some provisions. Put it on my account." The storekeeper's eyebrows shot up. "Now, Mr. Harper, my account," Daniel Harper repeated firmly. Then, to Eliza, "Ma'am, I don't mean to presume, but gold isn't what we need out here." "You are." She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon. My father runs Harper Ranch, about 5 miles north. We lost our cook last month when she married and moved to Colorado. We've got 8 ranch hands who can rope a steer blindfolded but can't boil water without burning it." A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "If you can cook and aren't afraid of hard work, we've got a position available. Room, board, and wages." Eliza's throat tightened. She'd been a merchant's wife in Missouri, before the fever took Thomas and the bank took everything else. Cooking for ranch hands wasn't what she'd imagined her life would become. But then, neither was starving on the prairie. "I can cook," she managed. "Then we'd be obliged if you'd consider the position." He turned to Holbrook. "Get her whatever she needs for the road, some proper supplies, too." As the storekeeper grudgingly began filling a basket, Daniel Harper studied her with those steady green eyes. "When did you last eat a real meal?" Pride flared briefly. "That's not your concern, Mr. Harper." "It is if you're going to work for us. Can't have you fainting into the stew pot." His tone was matter-of-fact, not unkind. "There's a boarding house across the street. Mrs. Donnelly serves a fair noon meal. You could eat, rest up, and I'll come back with the wagon in 2 hours." "I haven't accepted your offer yet." "No, ma'am, you haven't, but you're considering it, else you'd have walked out already." He placed some coins on the counter. "For Mrs. Donnelly," he said to Holbrook. "See the lady gets there safely." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Keep your ring, Mrs. Carter, Eliza Carter. Mrs. Carter, keep it. Out here, we don't trade away our memories. We just learn to carry them different." After he left, Holbrook handed her the basket, now heavy with cornmeal, salt pork, dried beans, and even a small bag of sugar. "Daniel Harper's a good man," he said grudgingly. "His pa's fair, too. It's honest work they're offering." Eliza nodded, clutching the basket with one hand and the ring with the other. Through the store window, she watched Daniel Harper mount his horse with easy grace. He sat for a moment, looking back at the store, then touched his hat brim and rode off in a cloud of dust. The boarding house was a 2-story clapboard building that had seen better days. Mrs. Donnelly, a bird-like woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, looked Eliza up and down before showing her to a small table near the kitchen. "Daniel Harper sent you, did he? Good boy, that one. Shame about his mother passing last year. The ranch hasn't been the same without a woman's touch." She set down a plate of beef stew and cornbread. "Eat up, dear. You look like a stiff wind would blow you to Nebraska." The food was simple but plentiful, and Eliza had to force herself to eat slowly. Pride might be a luxury, but dignity she could still afford. As she ate, she turned the gold band over in her fingers, remembering Thomas's face when he'd slipped it on her hand. He'd been so proud, so sure of their future together. Nothing wrong with taking a new direction, Mrs. Donnelly said, noticing her preoccupation. "This territory's full of folks starting over, some running from something, some running to something. The lucky ones find what they're looking for." 2 hours later, Eliza stood on the boarding house porch, her meager belongings in a worn carpet bag, the basket of provisions at her feet. The sound of wagon wheels announced Daniel Harper's return before she saw him round the corner. He handled the team of horses with the same quiet competence he'd shown in the store. "Mrs. Carter." He jumped down to help her with her things. "Decided to take a chance on us? It seems I have little choice." "Mr. Harper, there's always a choice. Just sometimes one option's better than the others." He lifted her carpet bag into the wagon bed with ease. "The ranch is a fair piece out. We'll be there before sundown." As she settled onto the wagon seat, Eliza took one last look at the town. Holbrook's General Store, where she'd nearly traded away her last link to her former life. The boarding house, where kindness had come with beef stew and wisdom. The dusty street where desperation had driven her to consider the unthinkable. "Second thoughts?" Daniel asked, gathering the reins. "No," she said firmly. "No second thoughts." As they rolled out of town, the vast prairie stretched before them, golden grass rippling like waves in the wind. The sky was impossibly wide, a dome of blue broken only by wisps of cloud. It was beautiful and terrifying in its emptiness. This land that demanded everything and promised nothing. "Your father won't mind that you've hired a complete stranger?" Eliza asked as the town disappeared behind them. "Pa trusts my judgment. Besides, we're all strangers out here until we're not." He glanced at her. "That ring, your husband? Fever, 6 months ago. I'm sorry for your loss." They rode in silence for a while. The only sounds the creak of wagon wheels and the steady clop of hooves. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "My mother used to say that the prairie takes everything soft away from you. But if you're strong enough, it gives you something back, a different kind of softness. Maybe the kind that comes from surviving." Eliza thought about that as they rode toward her uncertain future. She'd lost everything soft, her comfortable home, her merchant husband, her place in society. But she was still here, still breathing, still moving forward. Maybe that was its own kind of strength. The sun was beginning its descent when Daniel pointed ahead. There, Harper Ranch. In the distance, she could see buildings taking shape. A main house, a barn, what looked like a bunkhouse. Smoke rose from a chimney, and she could make out figures moving among a herd of cattle. It wasn't much by Missouri standards, but against the vast emptiness of the prairie, it looked like civilization itself. "Welcome to your new home, Mrs. Carter," Daniel said. "Such as it is." Eliza straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. She'd been a merchant's wife, soft and sheltered. That woman had died with Thomas in Missouri. The woman riding into Harper Ranch was someone new, someone the prairie was still shaping. She clutched her wedding ring one more time, then slipped it into her pocket, not throwing it away, not trading it for bread, but carrying it forward into whatever came next. Daniel Harper had been right out here. They didn't trade away their memories. They just learned to carry them different. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the main house just as the sun touched the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of amber and rose. Before Daniel could help her down, the front door opened and a man emerged. Older, grayer, but bearing the same lean build and steady gaze as his son. "Pa, this is Mrs. Carter," Daniel said, lifting Eliza's carpet bag from the wagon. "She's agreed to take on the cooking." Jacob Harper studied her with eyes that missed nothing. His face was carved by wind and weather into deep lines, but there was no cruelty in it. "Ma'am," he said simply, touching the brim of his hat, "Daniel says you've fallen on hard times." "I'm willing to work, Mr. Harper," Eliza replied, meeting his gaze directly. "That's all that matters now." A ghost of approval flickered across the older man's features. "Fair enough. Daniel will show you to your quarters. Supper's at 6 sharp. The men get powerful cranky when they're kept waiting." He paused, then added more gently, "We're glad to have you. Mrs. Carter, it's been too long since this kitchen saw proper use." The kitchen, as it turned out, was both better and worse than Eliza had expected. The room itself was spacious, with a large cast-iron stove, sturdy work tables, and shelves lined with provisions. But dust coated every surface, and the remnants of the ranch hands' attempts at cooking were evident in scorched pots and a sink full of unwashed dishes. "I know it's a sight," Daniel said apologetically, setting her bag down. "The boys tried their best, but—" "It's fine," Eliza interrupted, already rolling up her sleeves. "Though I'll need water heated for cleaning, and someone will have to show me where everything's kept." "I'll fetch water," he offered immediately. "Your room's through there. It's small, but it's private. Used to be the pantry before Ma had it converted." The room was indeed small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window looking out toward the barn. Eliza set her few belongings on the bed and returned to face the disaster of a kitchen. "How many men am I cooking for?" "8 hands, plus Pa and me. Sometimes more during roundup or when we hire extras." Daniel was already pumping water into buckets. "The men eat hearty. They work hard." As he heated water on the stove, Eliza began her assessment. The larder was well stocked with basics: flour, cornmeal, beans, salt pork, preserved goods. There was even a root cellar with potatoes and onions. She could work with this. "What time do the men rise?" "First light. They'll want coffee and breakfast by 5. He glanced at her. "I know it's a lot to ask. Starting tomorrow." "I'll manage." She began sorting through the pots, setting aside those too damaged to save. "Mr. Harper, Daniel, where's the nearest creek for washing?" "Behind the house, about 50 yards. But we haul water for the kitchen." He paused in his work. "Mrs. Carter, about what I said in town." She looked up from scrubbing a pot. "Yes? When I said gold isn't what we need, I meant it. This ranch runs on work and grit, not pretty things. We've all got our reasons for being here. Our losses. What matters is what we do with today." Before she could respond, the door banged open and men began filing in. Drawn by the smell of heated water and the sight of a woman in the kitchen, they were a rough-looking bunch, sun-darkened, dusty, ranging from a boy who couldn't be more than 17 to a grizzled man who might have been 60. "Boys," Daniel said firmly, "this is Mrs. Carter, our new cook. Mind your manners." They shuffled and muttered greetings, hats coming off in awkward deference. The youngest, tow-headed and freckled, blurted out, "Ma'am, does this mean no more of Hank's beans?" "Hey now," protested a burly man with a thick mustache, presumably Hank. "My beans ain't that bad. Your beans could shoe a horse," another man drawled, earning a round of laughter. "Enough." Jacob Harper's voice cut through the noise from the doorway. "Mrs. Carter's got work to do. You all clear out and let her do it. Supper's at 6. They filed out reluctantly, but Eliza caught the hope in their eyes. As the door closed behind them, she turned to Daniel. "Is there coffee? They'll expect coffee in the morning." "I'll show you where everything is," he said. And for the next hour, He helped her navigate the kitchen's mysteries, where the coffee was stored, how the stove's dampers worked, which pots were for what purpose. He was patient and thorough, and she found herself relaxing slightly. "Your mother?" she ventured as she seasoned a salvaged pot. "She taught you about kitchens?" "Some. I was the youngest. Spent more time in the house than my brothers." A shadow crossed his face. "They're gone now. The war took them. It's just Pa and me running things." The war. It had taken so many, left so many women widowed, so many families broken. Eliza didn't ask which side out here. It mattered less than survival. By the time the sun had fully set, she had the kitchen in some semblance of order and a simple supper ready. Beans, properly seasoned this time. Cornbread and fried salt pork. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and plentiful. The men filed in promptly at 6, taking their places at the long table with an eagerness that would have been comical if it weren't so earnest. Jacob took the head, Daniel to his right, and Eliza served quickly and efficiently. The first bite was met with absolute silence. Then the youngest, she'd learned his name was Billy, let out a sound that was almost a moan. "Ma'am, this is, it's food, Billy," she said crisply. "Eat it while it's hot." But she saw the looks exchanged, the way they ate with renewed appetite, cleaning their plates and looking hopefully for more. She'd made extra, anticipating hungry men, and watched with satisfaction as the serving platters emptied. "Hey, Mrs. Carter," Jacob Harper said as she cleared the table. "That was a fine meal. First one we've had in too long." The compliment was simple, but she could see he meant it. The other men murmured agreement, and she caught Daniel watching her with something like gratitude in his eyes. After supper, as she washed dishes, Daniel appeared at her elbow with a dish towel. "You don't have to," she began. "Ma makes maid. Everyone help with cleanup. No reason to change now." He took a dripping plate from her hands. "The men are already talking about breakfast. Billy offered to get up early to help with the fire if it means proper biscuits. I'll manage the fire myself." "Thank you." But she was pleased despite herself. It had been so long since anyone had appreciated anything she'd done. "You did well tonight," he said quietly. "I knew you would. You knew nothing about me except that I was desperate enough to trade my wedding ring for bread. I knew you still had pride in your bearing, even hungry. Knew you looked at that ring like it meant something more than gold. Knew you didn't beg, even when begging might have worked." He set down the towel and met her eyes. People reveal themselves in hard moments. "Mrs. Carter, what I saw in that store was someone who'd bend but not break." The words settled into her chest, warming something that had been cold for months. She turned back to the dishes to hide whatever might be showing on her face. "Fine words, Mr. Harper, but I'm just a cook now. Nothing more. Nothing wrong with honest work." He picked up the towel again. "And please, just Daniel. Mr. Harper is my father." They finished the dishes in companionable silence. As Eliza dried her hands, she noticed him pull something from his pocket, a small bunch of prairie flowers, already slightly wilted. "Picked these on the way back from town," he said, almost shyly. "Thought your room might—" Well, Ma always liked flowers in the house. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle from this quiet man, that Eliza felt her throat tighten. She took the flowers carefully. "Thank you, Daniel." He nodded and turned to go, then paused at the door. "Mrs. Carter, what you said about being just a cook, you're wrong. You're someone who's choosing to build something new instead of lying down in the ashes of what was. That takes courage most folks don't have." After he left, Eliza stood in the clean kitchen, holding the prairie flowers. Through the window, she could see lights in the bunkhouse, hear the low rumble of men's voices and occasional laughter. Above, stars were beginning to pierce the darkening sky, more stars than she'd ever seen in Missouri. She found a small jar for the flowers and placed them on the windowsill in her room. As she prepared for bed, her hand went automatically to her pocket where the wedding ring rested. Thomas would have liked Daniel Harper, she thought, would have appreciated his straightforward manner and quiet kindness. for the first time in 6 months. The thought of her husband didn't bring the sharp stab of grief she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, there was a gentler ache, like an old bruise rather than a fresh wound. Tomorrow would come early 4 a.m. to start the fires, to begin the bread, to brew coffee strong enough to wake men who worked from dawn to dusk. It would be hard work, harder than anything she'd done as a merchant's wife. But it was work, and shelter, and people who looked at her with hope instead of pity. Gold isn't what we need. You are. The words echoed in her mind as she lay down on the narrow bed, fully clothed except for her boots. Tomorrow she'd unpack properly, wash her spare dress, settle in. Tonight, she was too tired for anything but sleep. But just before she drifted off, she thought about Daniel's eyes when he'd handed her those flowers, green as prairie grass, warm as summer rain. Something fluttered in her chest, unfamiliar after months of numbness. Not hope, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, the possibility of it. The rooster's crow came too soon, pulling Eliza from dreams of Missouri mornings and Thomas's gentle smile. For a moment, she forgot where she was, reaching across the narrow bed for a warmth that wasn't there. Then the unfamiliar walls came into focus, and with them, the weight of her new reality. Harper Ranch, day 1. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, pinning her hair back severely and tying on the apron she'd found hanging behind the door. The kitchen was cold and silent as a tomb, but she knew her way around now. First the fire, coaxing life from last night's banked embers. Then water for coffee, set to boil while she mixed biscuit dough. By the time boots began stomping on the porch, she had coffee brewing strong enough to float a horseshoe and biscuits turning golden in the oven. The door opened to admit Billy, the tow-headed boy, his eyes hopeful. "Morning, ma'am. That coffee I smell." "It'll be ready when you are," she said briskly. Breakfast at 5 means breakfast at 5. Not a moment before. But she softened the words with a small smile, and Billy grinned back before retreating to wait with the others. She could hear them gathering outside, voices low and anticipatory. At 5 precisely, she opened the door. "Breakfast is served." They filed in with more order than the previous evening, taking what she realized were established places at the table. Daniel nodded to her as he passed, and she noticed he'd already been working. His shirt showed signs of hay and horsehair. "Morning chores," he explained, catching her glance. "Horses don't care what time a man rises." She served quickly. Biscuits, gravy made from last night's pan drippings, fried potatoes, and thick slices of salt pork. The coffee disappeared so fast she had to brew a second pot before she could pour her own cup. "Mrs. Carter," Jacob said as he split his third biscuit. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My mother, back in Ohio. Then my husband." She stopped, cleared her throat. "A woman learns what she needs to learn." "Well, we're grateful for your learning," said an older hand named Samuel, his weathered face creasing into a rare smile. "Haven't had biscuits this light since my own mother's kitchen." The praise warmed her more than the coffee. As the men prepared to head out for the day's work, Daniel lingered. "The supply wagon goes to town end of the week," he said. "Make a list of what you need. Pa's already said to get whatever makes your work easier." "That's generous. It's practical. Good food keeps good workers." He paused at the door. "There's a milk cow in the barn, Rosie. She's gentle enough if you want fresh milk for cooking. I can show you after supper." The morning flew by in a rhythm of washing, preparing, planning. She explored the root cellar more thoroughly, took inventory of the larder, and discovered a neglected kitchen garden behind the house, choked with weeds but showing signs of what it had been. At noon, she packed a simple meal into a basket, cold biscuits, cheese, dried beef, and rang the triangle hanging by the kitchen door. She'd learned from Billy that the hands took their midday meal wherever they were working, too far to come back to the house. Daniel appeared to collect the basket, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the moderate temperature. "They're grateful," he said simply. "Hank usually just throws hardtack in a sack." "Hardtack," she repeated. appalled. No wonder they were so pleased with simple beans. His laugh was rusty, as if he didn't use it often. "Ma'am, you could serve them boot leather and they'd thank you, long as it wasn't Hank's cooking." She found herself smiling back. "I'll aim a bit higher than boot leather." The afternoon brought unexpected company. She was scrubbing the long table when she heard horses approaching, then voices. Daniel's and others she didn't recognize. Through the window, she saw 3 riders, their mounts dusty from hard travel. The kitchen door opened, and Daniel entered with 2 men. The third, she noticed, remained outside with the horses. The visitors were rough-looking, trail-worn, with the hard eyes of men who'd seen too much. "Mrs. Carter, these gentlemen are looking for work. Thought they should know we've got a proper cook now." "To the men," he added. "Mrs. Carter keeps this kitchen. Her word is law here." The taller of the 2, a man with a scar through his left eyebrow, looked her up and down with an assessment that made her spine stiffen. "Ma'am," he said, touching his hat brim. "Name's Wade. This here's Collins." Something about them set her teeth on edge, but she nodded politely. "Gentlemen, we'll take our meals with the hands if Mr. Harper sees fit to hire us." Wade continued, his eyes never leaving her face. "Been a long time since we had home cooking." "The hands eat at 6, she said evenly. "Those who work, eat." Wade's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Fair enough." After they left, Eliza found her hands were trembling slightly. She gripped the edge of the table, angry at her own reaction. She'd dealt with all manner of men in Thomas's store, some rougher than these, but something about Wade's measuring look had reminded her of her vulnerability here, a lone woman among strangers. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Daniel stood in the doorway, concern creasing his brow. "You all right?" "Fine," she said automatically, then admitted, "They made me uncomfortable." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Trust your instincts. I'm not sure about them myself, but we need the hands. Roundup's coming." He studied her face. "I'll make sure they understand the rules. Anyone bothers you, they're gone." The protection in his voice steadied her. "Thank you. It's not—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "Ma would have my hide if I didn't look after. That is, you're under our roof. That means something." Before she could respond, he was gone, back to the endless work of the ranch. But his words lingered, another small warmth against the cold that had lived in her chest for months. Supper that night included the 3 newcomers. Wade and Collins ate with appreciation but kept glancing around, taking measure of everything. The third man, introduced as Doyle, barely spoke at all. The regular hands seemed wary of them, conversation more stilted than usual. Only Billy maintained his usual chatter, describing the day's work with enthusiasm that made even fence mending sound adventurous. "And then the wire snapped back and caught Sam right in the—" "Billy," Samuel interrupted firmly, glancing at Eliza. "Mind your tongue." The boy flushed red. "Sorry, ma'am." After supper, as promised, Daniel showed her to the barn, the milk cow. Rosie was a placid brown and white creature who regarded Eliza with mild curiosity. "She's gentle," Daniel assured her, demonstrating the proper way to approach. "Ma used to say milking was thinking time, peaceful." Eliza tentatively touched Rosie's warm flank. The cow merely swished her tail, unconcerned. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was." His voice carried old grief, carefully managed. "This whole place, it's different without her. Pa tries, but there's things a woman sees that men don't." "Such as?" He gestured vaguely. "Beauty things, comfort. She'd put flowers on the table, curtains in windows, made it feel like more than just a place to sleep between work." Eliza thought of the prairie flowers wilting on her windowsill. "Is that why you picked those flowers yesterday?" Color touched his weathered cheeks. "Maybe. Seemed like something she'd want me to do." They stood quietly in the barn's peaceful dimness, the only sounds Rosie's occasional shift and the settling of hay. It was companionable. This silence, without the sharp edges of loneliness. "I should get back," Eliza finally said. "Early morning comes quick." "I'll walk you." It was only a short distance to the house, but she didn't protest. The stars were brilliant overhead, the prairie wind carrying the scent of grass and distant rain. At the kitchen door, Daniel paused. "Mrs. Carter, Eliza." Her name sounded different in his voice, careful and considered. "I'm glad you're here. We all are." She looked up at him, this quiet man who'd offered her work instead of pity, dignity instead of charity. "I'm beginning to be glad too." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "Good. That's good." After he left, Eliza stood in her kitchen now. She realized and felt something she hadn't expected. Not quite belonging, not yet, but the possibility of it, taking root like seeds in spring soil. She thought of Thomas, of the life they'd planned, the children they'd never have. That future was gone, buried with him in Missouri soil, but standing in this kitchen, with flour under her nails and the lingering warmth of Daniel's smile. She thought maybe, just maybe, there might be a different future waiting, not a replacement for what was lost, but something new, something unexpected, something that could grow strong in prairie soil if given half a chance. Tomorrow there would be more meals, more work, the steady rhythm of sustaining life in this hard land. But tonight, for the first time in months, that didn't seem like mere survival. It seemed like the beginning of something else entirely. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm as steady as heartbeat. Eliza rose before dawn, her hands learning the particular temperament of the old stove. The exact moment when biscuit dough was ready. The precise strength of coffee that would rouse tired cowboys. The work was hard, harder than anything she'd done in Missouri. But there was satisfaction in watching empty plates return to her kitchen, in hearing the men's appreciation. Her body grew stronger, the hollow cheeks filling out, the tremor in her hands disappearing. The sun darkened her skin despite her bonnet, and calluses formed where soft merchant's wife hands had been. But with each passing day, the ghost of who she'd been faded a little more, replaced by someone she was still learning to recognize. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the prairie shimmering with late spring heat. When she heard the commotion, she was kneading bread, flour dusting her arms. When Billy burst through the door, "Mrs. Carter, come quick! Daniel's horse threw him!" The dough forgotten, she ran after Billy toward the corral. A cluster of men stood around a figure on the ground. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pushed through them. Daniel sat propped against the fence, his face pale beneath the tan, holding his left arm against his chest. Relief flooded through her. He was conscious, talking. "Just a disagreement with a green colt," he said through gritted teeth. Nothing broken, but she could see the unnatural angle of his shoulder, the tight lines of pain around his mouth. Without thinking, she knelt beside him, her hands gentle as she examined the injury. Dislocated, she diagnosed. Her father had been a doctor before drink claimed him. She'd learned more than a lady should about bodies and their failures. "It needs setting." Jacob Harper appeared, his face grim. "Doc Morrison's in town." "Half-day's ride. I can do it," Eliza heard herself say. "But it'll hurt." Daniel's eyes met hers, green depths full of trust that made her breath catch. "Do it." She sent Billy for whiskey and clean cloth, then positioned herself behind Daniel. The men watched with skeptical interest as she placed her hands precisely, remembering her father's teachings. "On 3, she said, 1, 2. On 2, she pulled and rotated in one smooth motion. The shoulder slipped back into place with an audible pop. Daniel's whole body went rigid, a strangled sound escaping him, but the joint was where it belonged. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," breathed Samuel. "Where'd you learn that?" "My father," she said simply, fashioning a sling from the cloth Billy brought. "This needs to stay immobile for a few days." Daniel's color was already better, the sharp edge of pain fading from his features. His good hand caught hers as she adjusted the sling. "Thank you." The touch was brief, but it sent warmth spreading up her arm. She stood quickly, brushing dust from her skirts. "You should rest. Billy, help him to the house." But Daniel insisted on walking himself, stubborn pride in every careful step. Eliza followed, ignoring the knowing looks some of the men exchanged. That evening, she brought supper to Daniel's room, the first time she'd been beyond the kitchen and her own small quarters. The room was plain but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a shelf of well-worn books. He sat propped against pillows, attempting to eat one-handed. "Let me," she said, taking the plate. "I'm not an invalid." "No, you're a stubborn fool who'll re-injure that shoulder trying to prove something." She cut his meat into manageable pieces. "There. Now you can feed yourself and maintain your masculine pride." His laugh surprised them both. "You sound like Ma." She had no patience for what she called foolish male vanity. A wise woman. Eliza settled into the chair beside his bed. "Tell me about her." So he did. As the evening light slanted through the window, Margaret Harper had been a schoolteacher from Pennsylvania, come west with dreams of civilizing the frontier. Instead, she'd married Jacob Harper and spent 30 years making a home in the wilderness. She insisted on proper meals, even during roundup, said civilization started at the dinner table. His voice was warm with memory. "Taught all us boys to read and write, made us practice penmanship even when Pa said it was foolish. You'll thank me someday," she'd say. "Did you thank her?" "Every day." The warmth faded slightly. "Wish I'd told her more when she was here to hear it." They sat quietly as shadows lengthened. Eliza found herself studying his face in the soft light. The sun lines around his eyes, the firm jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead. He was handsome in the way of men who worked under open sky. Nothing polished or prettified about it. "You're staring," he said softly. Heat flooded her cheeks. "I was thinking you need a haircut." "That's so?" His eyes held gentle amusement. "You offering?" "I might be. Can't have you looking like a wild man at the table. Heaven forbid." He shifted, wincing slightly. "Eliza, can I ask you something?" She nodded, though her pulse quickened at his serious tone. "Your husband, do you miss him?" The question sat between them like a physical thing. She considered her answer carefully. "I miss who we were together, the life we built, the future we planned." She paused, searching for truth. "But the sharp edge of it, that's fading. Sometimes I feel guilty about that. Ma used to say grief was like prairie fire, burns everything at first, but then new things grow in the ashes. Doesn't mean the old growth didn't matter, just means life keeps on." "Your mother sounds like she was full of wisdom." "She was full of something," he said with a slight smile. "Pa called it Irish stubbornness." Eliza found herself smiling back. "And did you inherit this Irish stubbornness? Why do you think I tried to ride that green colt?" She laughed then, real and unforced, and saw something shift in his expression. His good hand moved toward hers on the armrest, stopped just short of touching. "Eliza," he said quietly. "Mrs. Carter," Billy's voice from downstairs broke the moment. "Sorry to bother, but Collins is asking about second helpings, and Hank said to tell him, I'll be right there." She called back, standing quickly. "You should rest. I'll send Billy up with anything else you need." She fled before he could respond, her heart beating too fast, her skin too warm. In the safety of her kitchen, she pressed her palms against the cool wood of the table and tried to steady herself. This was dangerous territory. She was widow, hired help, dependent on the Harpers' goodwill, and Daniel. Daniel was a good man who deserved better than a woman still wearing her dead husband's ring. But oh, the way he looked at her, the way her name sounded in his voice, the careful distance he maintained that spoke of respect, not disinterest. "Mrs. Carter?" Billy appeared in the doorway. "Everything all right?" "Fine," she said briskly, moving to the stove. "Tell Collins he can have seconds if he splits tomorrow's kindling." The boy grinned. "Yes, ma'am. That'll teach him." The next days passed with Daniel relegated to light work, much to his visible frustration. But his shoulder healed clean, and by week's end, He was back in the saddle, though Eliza noticed he favored his right side. It was a Sunday afternoon when things shifted again. The Hands had the day off, most gone to town, and Jacob was visiting a neighboring ranch. Eliza was tending the kitchen garden she'd slowly been reclaiming when she heard hoofbeats. Daniel appeared, leading 2 saddled horses. Thought you might like to see more of the ranch. She looked down at her dirt-stained apron. I'm hardly dressed for riding. You're dressed fine. Come on, Eliza. The work will keep. There was something in his voice. Not pleading exactly, but close, that made her untie her apron. She hadn't been on a horse since leaving Missouri, but muscle memory served as he helped her mount the gentle mare. They rode in companionable silence at first, the prairie spreading endless before them. Daniel pointed out landmarks, the creek that marked their eastern boundary, the stand of cottonwoods where they gathered cattle during storms, the hill where his mother was buried beside his brothers. They stopped there, dismounting to pay respects. 3 simple crosses marked the graves, wildflowers growing between them. She'd like what you've done with the kitchen, Daniel said quietly. Like having life in the house again. It's just cooking. No. He turned to face her fully. It's more than that. You've brought something back that's been missing. The men feel it. Pa feels it. He stopped, jaw working. Daniel, she said softly, I know you're still grieving. I know I've got no right. He took a breath. But I need you to know that seeing you in that kitchen, hearing you laugh with Billy, watching you gentle that cow like you've been doing it all your life, it's the first time this place has felt like home since Ma died. The words hung between them, raw and honest. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know if I'm ready. I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. Just wanted you to know. You're not just the cook to me. Eliza, you're... He gestured helplessly. You're becoming everything. She stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his green eyes, the hope and fear warring in his expression. Her hand moved without her permission, touching his cheek. I'm scared, she whispered. So am I. He covered her hand with his, warm and calloused. But maybe that's all right. Maybe being scared together is better than being brave alone. She thought of Thomas then, but not with the sharp guilt she'd expected. Instead, she heard his voice, gentle as always. Be happy, Liza. That's all I ever wanted for you. Maybe, she said, and saw Daniel's face transform with tentative hope. They rode back as the sun set, not touching but aware of each other in a way that made the air between them sing. At the house, Daniel helped her dismount, his hands lingering on her waist. Thank you, she said, for showing me the ranch, for... She couldn't finish, but he seemed to understand. Always, he said simply. That night, as she prepared for bed, Eliza took off her wedding ring for the first time since Thomas had placed it there. She held it up to the lamplight, this small circle of gold that had meant everything and nothing. She didn't put it away. Not yet. But she set it on the washstand instead of wearing it to bed. It was a small change, but like prairie flowers after fire, small changes could grow into something beautiful, given time and tenderness and the courage to reach for sun. The autumn air carried a bite that morning, promising the coming change of seasons. Eliza pulled her shawl tighter as she walked from the henhouse. Eggs gathered in her basket. The prairie grass had turned gold, matching the sunrise that painted the horizon in shades of amber and rose. Festival starts Saturday, Billy announced at breakfast, bouncing in his seat with barely contained excitement. There'll be dancing and pie contests and... Settle down before you upset your plate, Samuel chided, though his weathered face showed amusement. You'd think you were still 10 years old. Let him be excited, Eliza said, refilling coffee cups. When's the last time any of you had cause for celebration? The men exchanged glances. It had been 2 years since Margaret Harper's passing. 2 years since the ranch had participated in town festivities. But something had shifted in recent months. A lightness returning to the household that made celebrations seem possible again. Mrs. Carter's right. Jacob said from the head of the table. "Time we stopped living like we're in mourning. Margaret wouldn't want that." He looked at Daniel. "You'll escort Mrs. Carter to the festival." It wasn't a question. Daniel's ears reddened, but he nodded. "If she's willing." All eyes turned to Eliza. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "I suppose I could use supplies from town." Billy whooped, earning another reprimand from Samuel. But the damage was done. The mood at the table had lifted, anticipation crackling like lightning before a storm. Over the following days, the ranch buzzed with preparation. The men debated which horses to show, who would enter the roping contest, whether Hank's famous or infamous corn liquor would make an appearance. Even the newcomers, Wade and Collins and Silent Doyle, seemed caught up in the enthusiasm. Eliza found herself both excited and anxious. It had been over a year since she'd attended any social gathering, and never as an unattached woman. Well, not unattached exactly. The entire county seemed to know she was the Harper Ranch's cook, and speculation about her relationship with Daniel had likely already made the rounds. The night before the festival, she stood before her small mirror, holding up her 2 dresses. Both were practical wool, suited for a merchant's wife in mourning. Neither seemed right for a harvest festival, for dancing, for the way Daniel looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." To her surprise, it was Jacob Harper who entered, carrying a box. "This was Margaret's," he said gruffly. "Been sitting in a trunk, doing nobody any good. She'd want it worn." Inside was a dress of deep blue cotton scattered with tiny flowers, simple but lovely. Beneath it lay a pair of kid gloves and ribbons for her hair. "Mr. Harper, I couldn't—" "You can and you will." His voice brooked no argument, but his eyes were kind. "My boy's been happier these past months than I've seen him since we lost her. That's your doing. Margaret would want you to have something nice." Emotion clogged her throat. "Thank you." He paused at the door. "Mrs. Carter, Eliza." Daniel's a good man, but he's cautious. Been hurt before, though he'd never say. Don't let him use that caution as a wall. After he left, Eliza held the dress up to herself. It would fit, she could tell. Margaret Harper had been of similar build. The thought of wearing a dead woman's dress to court her son should have felt macabre, but instead it felt like blessing, like acceptance. Saturday dawned clear and crisp. The men left early for town, riding or taking the supply wagon, leaving Daniel and Eliza to follow in the buggy. She'd risen even earlier than usual to prepare food for the communal meal, 2 pies, a batch of her famous biscuits, and a jar of preserves from the wild plums she'd found growing near the creek. When she emerged from her room wearing Margaret's dress, her hair pinned up with the ribbons, Daniel was already waiting by the buggy. He turned at her approach and stopped mid-motion, his expression stunned. "You look—" He cleared his throat. "You look beautiful." The compliment warmed her more than the wool shawl around her shoulders. "Your mother had lovely taste. Pa gave you her dress?" At her nod, something shifted in his face, a tension easing. She'd be glad. She always said pretty things should be worn, not hidden away. He helped her into the buggy with careful hands, and they set off toward town. The ride was quiet at first, both of them aware of the shift this day represented. Finally, Daniel spoke. "I should warn you, folks will talk about you being there with me." "Let them talk." He glanced at her, surprise and something deeper in his eyes. "You sure?" She thought about it, about propriety and reputation and the gossip of small towns. Then she thought about waking each morning with purpose, about Billy's enthusiasm and Samuel's quiet approval, about the way Daniel's smile made her feel alive again. "I'm sure." The town was transformed for the festival. Lanterns hung from every available surface, though they wouldn't be lit until evening. Tables groaned under the weight of communal feast preparations. The sound of fiddle music drifted from the cleared area that would serve as a dance floor. Children ran between the adults' legs. their laughter bright as bird song. Eliza felt the weight of eyes as they arrived, heard the whispers behind hands. The widow Carter with the Harper boy. That's her. The one who traded her ring for bread. Heard she's quite the cook. But there were smiles too, nods of greeting. And when Mrs. Donnelly from the boarding house spotted her, the elderly woman bustled over with genuine warmth. "Don't you look lovely, dear? And those pies smell divine. You must give me your crust recipe." She lowered her voice conspirationally. "Don't mind the busybodies. Half of them would trade places with you in a heartbeat." The day passed in a whirl of activity. Eliza found herself judging the pie contest, diplomatically awarding first place to the minister's wife. Watching the men compete in roping contests, Daniel took second, beaten only by a hand from the Double Bar Ranch, and being introduced to what felt like half the county. As the sun began its descent, the lanterns were lit and the dancing began. Eliza stood at the edge of the crowd, watching couples whirl to the lively fiddle music. She'd loved dancing once, back when Thomas was alive, back when the future seemed certain. "May I have this dance?" Daniel stood before her, hand extended. He'd removed his work jacket, and his white shirt glowed in the lantern light. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. The first touch was electric, sending warmth shooting up her arm. He led her onto the floor as the fiddle shifted to a slower waltz. His hand was steady on her waist. Proper distance between them, but she was acutely aware of every point of contact. "I should tell you," he said as they began to move. "I'm not much of a dancer. You're doing fine." And he was, moving with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. "Where did you learn?" Ma insisted. Said a man who couldn't dance was only half civilized. His thumb brushed against her palm, perhaps accidentally. "Haven't had much cause to practice lately." They moved together as the music swelled, and Eliza felt herself relaxing into the rhythm. Other couples swirled around them, but they might have been alone for all she noticed. Daniel's eyes never left her face, and what she saw there made her breath catch. "Eliza," he said softly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Yes? He spun her gently, buying time. When she was back in his arms, he continued, "I was engaged once, before. Her name was Catherine." Eliza's steps faltered slightly, but he held her steady. She was the daughter of a rancher up north. Pretty, accomplished, everything a man could want. We were to be married, until she visited the ranch and saw what life here really meant. The isolation, the hard work, the uncertainty. His jaw tightened. She broke it off the night before she left, said she couldn't bury herself in the wilderness for any man. "Daniel, I'm telling you this because I need you to understand what I feel for you. It's not just loneliness or convenience. When you're in that kitchen, humming while you work, when you gentle that ornery cow, when you stand up to Wade when he gets too familiar, you're not just surviving this life, you're thriving in it. You're making it better." His voice dropped. "You're making me better." The music had stopped, but they stood frozen in place, oblivious to the dancers moving around them. Eliza reached up, touched his cheek as she had that day by his mother's grave. "I'm not Catherine," she said simply. "No," he agreed, covering her hand with his. "You're Eliza." "And that's everything." Someone cleared their throat nearby. Billy, grinning like a fool. "They're starting another dance, if you two are done staring at each other." Daniel's face flushed, but Eliza laughed. The sound bright and free. "One more dance," she told Daniel. "Then I should check on the pies." But one dance became two, then three. They talked between songs, about the ranch, about his mother's roses that Eliza was trying to resurrect, about the books on his shelf she'd been eyeing. When they finally took a break, Eliza felt lighter than she had in months, as if something heavy had been set down. The evening was winding down when trouble stirred. Eliza was helping pack leftover food when she heard raised voices. Near the dance floor, Wade and Collins were squared off with some hands from another ranch, whiskey evident in their swaying stances. "Said you were cheating," Wade slurred, hand hovering near his hip. Daniel appeared as if from nowhere, stepping between the groups. "Problem here?" "No problem," Wade said, but his eyes were mean. "Just explaining to these boys how things work. Only thing you're explaining is how to get fired," Daniel said evenly. "Walk it off, both of you, now." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Collins grabbed Wade's arm, mumbling something about not worth it, and they stumbled away. Daniel watched them go, tension in every line of his body. "Trouble?" Eliza asked quietly, appearing at his elbow. "Maybe Pa hired them, but—" He shook his head. "I'll talk to him. Tonight's not for worrying." He was right. As they loaded the buggy for the trip home, Eliza felt a contentment she'd thought lost forever. The festival had been everything she'd forgotten life could be. Joy and community, and the promise of something sweet. The ride home was quiet, but it was the comfortable silence of two people who'd said what needed saying. When they reached the ranch, Daniel helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist. "Thank you," she said, "for the dancing, for telling me about Catherine, for everything." "Eliza?" Her name was a prayer on his lips. "Can I?" "Yes," she whispered. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, as if she might break or disappear. She leaned into him, her hands finding his shoulders, and felt something inside her that had been frozen begin to thaw. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'll court you proper," he promised. "Whatever you need, however long it takes." "Just be yourself," she said. "That's all I need." Later, in her room, Eliza unpinned her hair and carefully folded Margaret's dress on the washstand. Her wedding ring caught the lamplight. She picked it up, held it for a long moment, then opened the small drawer and placed it gently inside. Not discarded, not forgotten, but put away. She was ready for what came next. The first sign of trouble came 3 days after the festival. Eliza was hanging laundry when she noticed riders on the horizon. Not the usual purposeful movement of ranch work, but the lazy circling of vultures eyeing prey. She shaded her eyes, counting 5, maybe 6 horses moving along their eastern boundary. That evening, Daniel's expression was grim as he entered the kitchen. "Someone cut our fence lines. Lost about 20 head before we noticed." "Rustlers?" Jacob asked from his place at the table. "Maybe, or someone wanting us to think so." Daniel's eyes flickered to where Wade sat with the other hands. Could be coincidence, but Eliza saw the doubt in his face, the careful way he watched the 3 newcomers. Wade caught the scrutiny and smiled, slow and mocking, before returning to his meal. The tension grew over the following days like storm clouds building on the prairie. More cut fences, a water hole fouled with a dead coyote. Small harassments that kept the men riding longer hours, tempers shorter, everyone looking over their shoulders. "It's Clayton Mason," Samuel said one evening, voice low. The regular hands had gathered in the kitchen after the others had left. A war council of sorts. "Got to be. He's been eyeing Harperland for years." "Can't prove it," Daniel said, frustration evident. "And we can't fight shadows." Eliza poured coffee, listening to the men debate. Clayton Mason owned the Double Bar Ranch to the north. Operation 3 times the size of theirs, run on greed and intimidation. She'd heard the stories. Hired guns, suspicious fires. Smaller ranchers driven out or bought out for pennies on the dollar. "Maybe that's what he wants," she said quietly. "To keep you chasing shadows while he plans something bigger." The men looked at her with surprise. She rarely spoke during these discussions. Daniel leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "In my husband's store, we had a competitor who played similar games. Little thefts, damaged goods, rumors spread. While we were distracted fixing small problems, he was working to buy our mortgage from the bank." She met Daniel's eyes. "What does Mason really want?" "The whole valley," Jacob said grimly. "Always has. We control the best water access. Then that's what he'll come for." Eliza said, "Not your cattle, your water." The room fell silent as the implication sank in. Without water rights, the ranch would wither like grass in drought. No amount of fence mending or cattle watching would matter if Mason found a way to claim their creek access. That night, Daniel walked her to her room as had become their custom. These moments were precious stolen kisses in doorways, quiet conversations under stars, the brush of hands when she served his plate, a courtship constrained by propriety and the watchful eyes of others, but no less sweet for it. "You're clever," he said, catching her hand. "Seeing what we missed. I've had practice watching for snakes," she replied. "Just because they're in business suits doesn't make them less dangerous." He pulled her close, and she went willingly, savoring his solid warmth. "I worry," he admitted against her hair. "If Mason makes a real move, then we'll face it," she said firmly. Together, his arms tightened. "I love you, Eliza." The words, first time spoken aloud, made her heart stutter. She pulled back to see his face, finding nervousness and hope in equal measure. "I love you too," she whispered, and watched joy transform his features. They might have stayed there forever, lost in the wonder of acknowledged feeling, but the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the spell. Daniel stepped away, hand moving to his sidearm as a rider materialized from the darkness. "Boss!" It was Pete, one of the younger hands. "Trouble at the creek. Riders, maybe a dozen." "Sam sent me to fetch you." Daniel was already moving. "Wake the others, quietly." To Eliza, "Get to the root cellar. Bar the door." "I can help." "Please." The single word held such weight that she nodded. He kissed her quickly, fiercely. "Promise me you'll stay safe. Promise me you'll come back. Always." Then he was gone, swallowed by darkness. Eliza stood frozen for a moment before training kicked in. She flew to the kitchen, grabbing the rifle Jacob kept behind the door, checking its load. The root cellar was safest, but she'd be blind down there. Instead, she barricaded herself in the kitchen, dousing all lamps but one turned low. Through the window, she watched men moving like shadows, their own hands heading out, led by Daniel and Jacob. In the bunkhouse, Wade and his companions seemed to be taking their time responding to the alarm. The waiting was agony. Every sound made her jump, wind-rattling shutters, the old house settling, her own thundering heartbeat. She thought of Thomas, of the fever that took him while she sat helpless beside his bed. But this was different. This she could fight, if it came to it. Time crawled. Then, distant but unmistakable, came the crack of gunfire. Not a single shot, but several, followed by eerie silence. Eliza gripped the rifle tighter, straining to see through the darkness. More shots. Closer now. She could make out muzzle flashes near the creek line. Hear men shouting, though not the words. The battle for battle, it surely was, raged like distant thunder, and she could only wait and pray. The kitchen door burst open. Eliza swung the rifle up, finger on the trigger, before recognizing Billy. The boy was pale, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Mrs. Carter, Daniel sent me. He's hurt. Needs—" But his words were cut off as Wade appeared behind him, shoving the boy aside. The foreman's clothes were clean, no sign of battle on him, and his smile was cold as winter. "Well now," he drawled. "Hing. Seems a shame to let all this excitement go to waste." Eliza kept the rifle trained on him. "Get out." "Don't think so. See, mister, Mason's paying good money for information about this ranch. Routines, defenses, weak spots." His eyes traveled over her insultingly. "Didn't expect a bonus like you, though." "I said get out." Her voice was steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. Wade took a step closer. "One woman with a rifle she probably can't use. Where's your protector now?" "Right here." Daniel stood in the doorway, left arm hanging useless, blood soaking his shirt. But the gun in his right hand was rock steady, pointed at Wade's head. "Should have stayed bought." Wade sneered, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "Should have picked better employers." Daniel's voice was ice. "Drop your gun. Slow." For a moment, violence balanced on a knife's edge. Then Wade's hand twitched toward his holster. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Wade crumpled, clutching his shoulder, his gun spinning across the floor. Daniel staggered but kept his feet, smoke rising from his Colt. "Anyone else?" Daniel asked the darkness beyond the door. "Just me." Collins appeared, hands raised. "I'm done with this." Doyle lit out soon as the shooting started. Wade was the only one taking Mason's money. "Then you'd best start riding," Daniel said. "Don't stop till you hit Colorado." Collins didn't need telling twice. He grabbed Wade, hauling the cursing man to his feet, and they disappeared into the night. Only then did Daniel's strength fail. He sagged against the doorframe, gun slipping from nerveless fingers. Eliza caught him as he fell, easing him to the floor. Blood soaked through his shirt from a wound high on his chest, and his face was gray with pain and blood loss. "Don't you dare," she said fiercely, pressing her hand against the wound. "You promised to come back." "Did come back," he managed. "Others coming." Mason's men retreated, but... "Hush." She grabbed clean towels, trying to stem the bleeding. "Billy, get water boiling, now." The boy scrambled to obey as footsteps thundered on the porch. Jacob burst in, taking in the scene with one comprehensive glance. "How bad?" "Bullet's still in there," Eliza reported, her healer's instincts overriding emotion. "High chest, missed the lung, but he's losing blood fast." More men crowded in. Samuel, Pete, others she recognized, all bearing signs of battle. Someone was sent for the doctor, though it would be hours before he could arrive. In the meantime, Eliza did what she could, her father's teachings serving her once more. "Talk to me," she commanded Daniel as she worked. "Stay awake." "Bossy," he mumbled. "Always liked that about you." "Then you'll love being married to me," she said without thinking. His eyes, glazed with pain, sharpened. "That proposal, despite everything, blood on her hands, fear in her throat." She smiled. "Maybe. You'll have to live to find out." "Motivation," he breathed, and she could have wept at the stubborn life in his voice. The hours that followed blurred together. The doctor arrived as dawn broke, praising Eliza's field treatment before taking over. Mason's men had indeed retreated, driven off by fierce resistance and the arrival of riders from neighboring ranches, summoned by a prescient Samuel. "Word travels fast out here," the old hand explained. "Mason pushes one of us. He pushes all of us. He won't try again soon." Through it all, Eliza refused to leave Daniel's side. When the bullet was out and the wound dressed, when fever came and broke, when he finally opened clear eyes and spoke her name, she was there. "Stubborn woman," he said weakly. "Don't you have a kitchen to run?" "The kitchen can wait." She smoothed his hair back, gentle as spring rain. "Did you mean it? About marrying? Which one of us proposed to which?" But his eyes were serious. "Yes, Eliza, if you'll have a broken-down rancher with a tendency toward heroics. I suppose someone has to keep you from getting yourself killed." She leaned down, kissed him soft and sweet. "Yes, Daniel Harper. Yes, to everything." Outside, she could hear the ranch stirring to life, men calling to each other, cattle lowing, the eternal wind across grass. Harper Ranch had survived another trial, would face others in future, but sitting beside Daniel, his hand warm in hers, Eliza felt no fear. They'd face the darkness and won. Whatever came next, they'd meet it the same way, together, with courage, with love that was stronger than any shadow. The frontier demanded everything, but sometimes, if you were strong enough and lucky enough and stubborn enough, it gave back more than it took. The attack came at dawn, 2 weeks after Daniel had risen from his sick bed. Eliza woke to the thunder of hoofbeats and the crack of rifles. She'd been sleeping lightly these days, the Colt revolver Daniel had given her within easy reach on the nightstand. "Mason's men!" Billy's voice rang out from the yard. "Coming from the north!" Eliza dressed quickly, fingers steady despite her racing heart. Through her window, she could see riders streaming across the prairie, Not the dozen from before, but twice that number. Mason had hired more guns, determined to take the ranch once and for all. She grabbed the rifle and ammunition, heading for the kitchen where the windows gave the best view of the approaches. Daniel was already there, shirtless, his chest still bandaged, but his eyes sharp with purpose. "I told you to stay in your room," he said without looking at her, checking the load on his Winchester. "And I told you, I'm not the hiding type." She took position at the opposite window. "How many?" 20, maybe more. "Pa's got men positioned at the barn and bunkhouse." His jaw tightened. "This is different. Eliza, last time was testing our defenses. This is war." As if to emphasize his words, a bullet shattered the window beside them, showering glass across the floor. Eliza dropped below the sill, heart hammering, then carefully rose to return fire. Her shot went wide, but it forced the advancing riders to veer off. "Where did a merchant's wife learn to shoot?" Daniel asked, impressed despite the circumstances. "My father insisted, said a woman alone should know how to defend herself." She levered another round. "Though I never imagined this." The battle erupted in earnest. Gunfire crackled from multiple positions as Mason's hired guns tried to surround the ranch buildings. The defenders fought back desperately, using their knowledge of the terrain to advantage. But they were outnumbered, and Eliza could see riders working to flank their positions. "The barn," Daniel muttered, tracking movement through his sights. "They're going for the barn, where the horses were. Without mounts, the ranch would be crippled." Daniel started to move, but Eliza caught his arm. "You're wounded. I'll go." "Like hell. I'm faster, and they won't expect it." She was already grabbing extra ammunition. "Cover me." Before he could protest further, she was out the back door, running low across the open ground. Bullets whined overhead like angry hornets, but Daniel's covering fire kept the attackers' heads down. She made it to the barn's side door, slipping inside to find Samuel and 2 other hands crouched behind hay bales. "Mrs. Carter, what are you—" "Defending what's ours," she said grimly. Through the barn's wide doors, she could see riders massing for a charge. "They rush us. We'll never hold." Samuel's weathered face was grave. "No, ma'am, we won't." An idea struck her, desperate, dangerous, but maybe their only chance. "The horses." "If we stampede them out just as Mason's men charge?" Understanding dawned in Samuel's eyes. Might work, might also get us all killed. Better than dying certain. She moved toward the stalls where the horses stamped nervously, sensing the violence outside. "On my signal." They worked quickly, opening stall doors, positioning themselves through the gaps in the barn walls. Eliza watched the riders form up. She recognized the man leading them, Clayton Mason himself, come to oversee his victory. Arrogant fool. "Now!" she shouted. They fired into the air and slapped the horses' rumps, sending the terrified animals bolting through the open doors. 20 horses in full panic met 20 charging riders head-on. The collision was chaos, men shouting, horses screaming, dust billowing up to obscure everything. In the confusion, the defenders picked their shots carefully. Eliza saw Mason's horse rear, dumping him in the dirt. Another rider went down, then another. The charge broke apart, riders wheeling away from the mayhem. "The house!" Samuel pointed. In focusing on the barn, they'd left the main house exposed. Smoke was already rising from one corner where someone had thrown a torch. Eliza ran again, no thought for safety, only for the home that had become hers. She burst through the kitchen door to find Daniel fighting flames with water buckets, his bandages seeping red from reopened wounds. "Stubborn man," she gasped, grabbing another bucket. "Stubborn woman," he countered. They fought the fire together, side by side, while gunfire continued outside. The flames hadn't spread far. The torch had caught the porch more than the structure itself, but smoke filled the kitchen, making breathing difficult. A figure appeared in the doorway. Mason himself, clothes dusty but eyes burning with fury. He held a pistol trained on them. "Should have sold when I offered—" "Harper," he snarled at Daniel. "Now I'll take it all, including your woman." "The only thing you'll take is a bullet," Daniel said evenly. though Eliza saw his gun was across the room, out of reach. Mason smiled coldly. From who? You're unarmed. Boy. He's not alone. Jacob Harper stood behind Mason, his old Sharps rifle pressed to the land grabber's spine. Drop it, Clayton. Game's over. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Mason's face twisted with rage, and he started to turn, bringing his gun around. 3 shots rang out almost simultaneously. Mason jerked, spun, and fell. Eliza lowered her smoking Colt, hand trembling slightly. She'd shot him in the shoulder just as Jacob's bullet took him in the leg. Daniel's thrown knife protruded from his gun hand. Nice shooting, Daniel said quietly. All of us. Outside, the gunfire was dying down. Without Mason to lead them, his hired guns were retreating, pursued by arriving neighbors who'd seen the smoke and come to help. The siege was broken. It's done, Jacob said, looking down at Mason writhing on the floor. Someone fetch the sheriff. And the doctor. Again. The aftermath was a blur of activity. The sheriff arrived to arrest Mason and what remained of his men. The doctor tended wounds. Daniels reopened stitches. Burns on Eliza's hands from fighting the fire. Various injuries among the defenders. The neighboring ranchers who'd come to help were fed and thanked. Bonds of mutual aid strengthened. As the sun set, Eliza stood on the porch surveying the damage. Bullet holes pocked the walls. Windows were shattered. The corner where the fire had caught was charred black, but the ranch stood. They'd held. We'll need to rebuild, Daniel said, joining her. His arm was in a sling again, face pale but determined. We will, she agreed. Then the full weight of it hit her. What they'd survived. What they'd nearly lost. What they'd fought for. Her knees buckled. Daniel caught her with his good arm, pulling her against him. Hey, it's over. We're safe. I shot a man, she whispered. I've never... You saved us. All of us. He pressed his lips to her hair. You were magnificent. Eliza. Terrifying, but magnificent. She let out a shaky laugh. Is this what life will always be like? Fighting for what's ours? Sometimes, but not always. He turned her to face him. Most days will be quiet. Cooking breakfast, tending cattle, watching sunsets, raising children who'll be too stubborn for their own good. Children, despite everything, warmth bloomed in her chest. If you want, when you're ready. His eyes searched hers. I know today was proof, she interrupted. Proof of what? That I belong here, that this is home, that what we're building is worth fighting for. She reached up, cupped his face with a soot-stained hand. I love you, Daniel Harper. I love this ranch, this life, these people. I even love this ornery land that tries to kill us. He kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of promise. Around them, the ranch settled into evening men seeing to horses. Someone starting supper in the damaged kitchen. Life asserting itself over destruction. Marry me soon, he said against her lips. I don't want to wait. Next week, she agreed. As soon as you can stand upright for the ceremony. Billy's whoop from somewhere behind them suggested their conversation hadn't been as private as they'd thought. Within minutes, the entire ranch knew. Harper's boy and the widow were getting married. In the midst of battle's aftermath, joy sparked and spread like prairie fire. That night, as Eliza tended the wounded and fed the helpers, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From desperate widow trying to trade gold for bread, to a woman who defended her home with gun and grit. The old Eliza, the merchant's wife, could never have imagined this life. But that woman was gone, refined away by prairie wind and necessity. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who could face down hired guns and comfort the wounded, who could make biscuits at dawn and fight fires at noon, someone who'd found love not in spite of hardship but because of how they'd faced it together. You're wool gathering, Daniel observed, catching her in the hallway. Thinking about gold, she said. He looked confused. Gold? How you were right. Gold wasn't what this place needed. She smiled, thinking of her wedding ring tucked safely in a drawer, part of another life. It needed someone too stubborn to quit. It needed you. He corrected. We all did. We all do. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Repairs to make, a ranch to run, a wedding to plan in the midst of rebuilding. Mason was finished, but there would always be those who coveted what others had built. The frontier demanded vigilance as much as courage. But tonight, surrounded by people who'd become family, in a house scarred by battle but still standing, Eliza felt only gratitude. She'd traded her ring for a chance at survival and gained so much more. Love, purpose, a place to belong. Gold couldn't buy that. Only courage could earn it, and grace could keep it, and love could make it worth every fight. Winter had passed like a distant dream, taking with it the scars of battle and leaving hope in its wake. The bullet holes in the ranch house walls had been patched, the burned timber replaced, and new glass gleamed in the windows. Spring arrived with its usual promise, painting the prairie in shades of green and gold, bringing life back to a land that had seen too much death. Eliza stood before the mirror in Margaret Harper's room, her room now, adjusting the simple cream-colored dress she'd sewn herself. It wasn't fancy by Missouri standards, but the delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs spoke of hours spent by lamplight, creating something beautiful from plain cloth. At her throat hung a simple gold locket, Daniel's wedding gift, containing a sprig of prairie grass from the hill where his mother lay buried. "You look beautiful," came a voice from the doorway. "Mrs." Donnelly bustled in, her bird-like frame draped in her best Sunday dress. "Like a prairie rose, my dear. I feel like I might faint," Eliza admitted, pressing a hand to her stomach where butterflies danced. "Every bride feels that way. Even I did, 40 years ago." The older woman's eyes twinkled. "Though I suspect your young man is feeling worse. Last I saw, he was pacing the parlor like a caged wolf." Through the window, Eliza could see the preparations in the yard. Tables borrowed from neighbors groaned under the weight of food. Her kitchen had been cooking for days with help from the ranch women. Wildflowers decorated every available surface, and someone had strung ribbons between the posts, creating a festive canopy. Half the county seemed to have gathered, come to witness something good after the darkness of recent months. A knock at the door interrupted her musings. "Come in." Jacob Harper entered, looking uncomfortable but dignified in his best suit. In his hands, he carried a small wooden box. "This was Margaret's," he said gruffly. "Her mother's before that, came all the way from Ireland." He opened the box to reveal a delicate hair comb adorned with tiny pearls. "She'd want you to wear it today." Tears pricked Eliza's eyes as he gently placed the comb in her pinned-up hair. "Thank you," she whispered. "No, thank you." His weathered face was serious. "You brought my boy back to life. Eliza, brought this whole ranch back to life. Margaret would have loved you." He offered his arm. "Now, let's not keep that boy waiting any longer. He's likely worn a groove in the floorboards by now." The walk from the house to the yard felt both eternal and too quick. Then the makeshift aisle opened before her, and at the end stood Daniel, tall and straight despite his still healing wounds. His face, when he saw her, joy and wonder and love all mingled, made her forget the crowd, forget her nerves, forget everything but him. Billy stood as best man, trying to look serious but grinning too wide to manage it. Samuel had cleaned up remarkably well and stood with the other hands, all of them scrubbed and pressed into their Sunday best. Even Rosie the milk cow had been decorated with ribbons, grazing placidly nearby as if blessing the proceedings. The minister, fetched from town, kept the ceremony simple as requested. When he asked if anyone objected, a meadowlark trilled from a fence post, making everyone laugh. Daniel's hands were steady and warm as he slipped a plain gold band onto her finger, not elaborate like her first ring, but solid and true like the man giving it. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Daniel didn't need telling twice. He pulled her close, kissing her thoroughly enough to earn whoops from the cowboys and gentle tisking from the church ladies. When they parted, both breathless and laughing, The celebration erupted around them. The rest of the day blurred into a tapestry of joy. There was dancing to fiddle music, Daniel proving he'd been practicing as he whirled her around the makeshift floor. There were toasts, ranging from eloquent to embarrassingly honest, especially after Hank's corn liquor made its inevitable appearance. There was food in abundance, Eliza's cooking supplemented by dishes from every ranch wife in the valley. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Daniel drew her away from the celebration. They climbed the small hill behind the house, to the spot where prairie roses grew wild around 3 simple crosses. "Wanted to bring you here," he said quietly, "to introduce you proper." Eliza understood. She knelt by Margaret Harper's grave, placing her bouquet of wildflowers against the marker. "I'll take care of them," she promised softly. "Your husband, your son, this land you loved. I'll tend it all like you would have wanted." The wind whispered through the grass, and for a moment, Eliza could have sworn she felt approval in its touch. Daniel helped her rise, pulling her back against his chest as they watched the sun paint the prairie in colors of fire. "No regrets?" he asked. She thought of the desperate woman who'd stood in Holbrook's store all those months ago, ready to trade her last possession for bread. That woman could never have imagined this, standing on her own land, married to a man who saw her strength instead of her desperation, surrounded by people who'd become family. "None," she said firmly. "Though I do wonder. What would have happened if you hadn't been in that store that day?" His arms tightened around her. "I'd have found you somehow. Some things are meant to be, Eliza Harper." Eliza Harper. The name felt right on his lips, felt right in her heart. Not a replacement for who she'd been, but an evolution. The merchant's widow had become a rancher's wife, but more than that, she'd become herself. "We should get back," she said eventually, "before Billy drinks all of Hank's moonshine and starts singing those songs he thinks I don't know he knows." Daniel laughed. "Too late. I heard him starting on Sweet Betsy from Pike 10 minutes ago." They walked back hand in hand, the celebration still going strong. As they reached the yard, the crowd called for a speech. Daniel looked at Eliza, eyebrow raised in question. She nodded. "Friends," Daniel began, his voice carrying across the gathered faces. "A year ago, this ranch was dying. We'd lost my mother, lost our way, lost hope. Then a woman walked into our lives who reminded us that gold isn't what matters out here." He looked down at Eliza, love plain in his eyes. "What matters is grit, courage, the willingness to build something worth fighting for, the grace to find beauty in hard places, the strength to choose hope when despair would be easier. What matters," Eliza added, her voice clear and strong, "is finding people who'll stand with you when the storms come, who'll teach you that home isn't about where you came from, but where you choose to plant your feet and grow." The cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next county. As the celebration resumed with renewed vigor, Eliza found herself pulled into dance after dance, conversation after conversation. But through it all, her eyes found Daniel's, a constant touchstone in the happy chaos. Later, much later, when the last guests had departed or bedded down in the barn, when the ranch had settled into peaceful quiet, Daniel and Eliza stood alone in their kitchen now, in their home. "Happy?" he asked, drawing her close. "More than I knew was possible," she admitted. "Though I should warn you, I still can't milk that cow properly. She looks at me with such judgment." "We'll work on it," he promised, laughing. "We've got time. Time, such a precious gift, one she'd thought lost forever when Thomas died. But time wasn't just about duration. It was about depth, about filling whatever days you were given with purpose and love, and the courage to keep building even when the world tried to tear down what you'd made. Through the window, stars wheeled overhead in the vast prairie sky. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There was always work on a ranch, always something needing tending. But tonight, in the circle of her husband's arms, in the home they'd defended together, Eliza felt the deep peace of someone who'd found where they belonged. She thought again of that desperate moment in the general store, of kind green eyes and an unexpected offer. Gold isn't what we need, you are. Daniel had seen her truly that day, seen past the desperation to the strength underneath, and in seeing her, he'd helped her see herself. The wedding ring on her finger caught the lamplight, plain gold, honest and true, in the drawer upstairs. Thomas's ring rested peacefully, a treasured memory that no longer held her captive. She'd learned to carry her past differently, just as Daniel had promised, not as a weight to bear, but as a foundation to build upon. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked, feeling her contemplative mood. "About gold," she said. "About trades and bargains and unexpected gifts. And how sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what you really need." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, when they finally climbed the stairs to begin their life together properly. Eliza paused at the landing to look back at the kitchen, her kingdom, her sanctuary, the heart of the home where she'd found herself again. Tomorrow she'd be back at that stove before dawn, brewing coffee strong enough to wake cowboys and making biscuits light enough to earn Billy's continued devotion. She'd tend her garden and fight with Rosie the cow, and slowly, carefully, help build this ranch into something even stronger than before. But tonight, she was simply Eliza Harper, prairie wife, walking into her future with clear eyes and an open heart, ready for whatever storms or sunshine lay ahead. The frontier had tested her and found her worthy. Now it was time to live the life she'd fought to claim. And what a life it would be. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please comment below and let us know. We love connecting with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Eliza and Daniel's journey. Did their story touch your heart? We'd love to hear what you think.